So this is going to be a talk on a concept that I call a Viatopia. What this concept is, it's an intermediate state of society that's on track for the near best future. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. I'll then explain a bit from my kind of Better Futures series on the form that Viatopia needs to take, before finally making a case for thinking a bit more about deep space governance in particular. Okay, so let's start off with this, what is this concept? It's a term of art. So Viatopia is this intermediate state of society that is on track for the near best future. Think of it like a way station, where it may be that, you don't know what the kind of ultimate goal you're aiming for should be. However, you know such and such is a very good place to get to, no matter what other goals you have. So think about a young person who doesn't know what career that they want to pursue. However, they know that getting a good education and a degree will give them many more options and give them better ability to decide what career is best. Or imagine some people who are like lost in the wilderness and they don't know which direction to go in. However, there are some things that they can be confident they should be doing, like going to higher ground so that they can survey the terrain and then figure out actually where they should go. So the general thought here is just, well, okay, actually we don't need to know necessarily where society as a whole is ultimately heading to have this kind of intermediate goal. It's actually very common that we can describe a good way station without describing the ultimate goal. Some of you may know that I've previously talked about this idea of a long reflection. I'm still quite in favor of it, but that's just one version of what a Viatopia could be. Viatopia is the more general concept. So I'll distinguish it from a couple of different perspectives you could have. So there's utopianism. That's where you figure out what some ideal end state for society should be and aim towards that. Utopianism has a very bad track record, to say the least. So you can look at the long history of depictions of utopian society from Plato's Republic onwards, and normally they look quite dystopian from our perspective. So very often they involve some sort of totalitarian control, often they involve eugenics, sometimes they involve slavery, sometimes they involve pedophilia as part of this depicted utopian society. The general thought, though, is just we don't actually know what a good ideal end state is. And if you think you know, you're probably wrong. And so we should have a lot more epistemic humility about what good we're aiming for is. And so in light of the problems with utopian thinking, initially kind of Karl Popper, in arguing against utopianism, had this idea of piecemeal engineering. It's got a new brand from futurist Kevin Kelly, who talks about protopianism, where the thought is just forget about having any big picture view of where society is going as a whole. Instead, just look at what are the kind of urgent problems we face today and just solve them kind of one by one. The analogy here, I think, is like with hill climbing as an algorithm, where you're trying to get as high as you can and you just go up no matter where you are. However, as is well known with hill climbing algorithms, perhaps you can get to an even higher peak if you go down first before going up. But even more importantly, I think, even though I'm quite in favor of a kind of protopian piecemeal engineering approach in general, when we're faced with potentially very rapid growth, very rapid technological development that's being driven by AI, we're going to have a whole number of problems that are facing us all at once. The answers to many of these problems will be often quite irreversible. So we need some way of kind of judging what's actually most important to focus on. And I think protopianism does not give us that. However, this idea that the most important things that we should be focusing on are whatever puts society in the best place to steer itself towards utopia, whatever that may be, that is something that can act essentially as a North Star for us. And hopefully also could act as quite a widely accepted North Star. So what might that involve? I'll go kind of very briefly over this. So John Rawls has this idea of primary goods. These are basically things you would want no matter what else you would want. So in your own life, that would be knowledge, health, material wealth, freedom to choose between different courses in life, and so on. We can have this idea, but on a societal scale as well. So a societal primary good would be something a society would want no matter what it ultimately wants. So I think that includes material abundance, scientific knowledge and technological capability, the ability to engage in kind of positive sum trades, and very low levels of catastrophic risk. So for the people kind of lost in the wilderness, the equivalent there would be like, ensuring you've got good equipment, ensuring you can eat, that you can survive for a while, and so on. A different category is kind of optionality and information goods. So ensuring that society has as many options available to it as possible and is able to kind of reflect and improve. In interest of time, I'm going to crack on to say something a little bit more concrete about the form that Viatopia should take. So I wrote this long essay series on better futures, which is kind of a big part of it is making the case that the very best futures, something where humanity or humanity's descendants fulfill most of their potential, are much, much better even than a utopia, something that might look like a utopia by current standards. I don't have time to argue for this, but I don't know. Think about current society. Imagine how that would look to a medieval peasant. Medieval peasants, in fact, had a conception of utopia. They called it cocaine. And basically, it was like, you just have as many sausages as you like. And now we live in cocaine. However, we have not achieved a perfect society. And in fact, like one single moral error, which is how we treat non-human animals, is sufficient, in my view, to undermine and, in fact, possibly even outweigh all of the gains that we have achieved through improved living standards for human beings. And so that takes me to this kind of second point that I argue for in this series, which is the idea that this near best future is a narrow target. That you can't just have like a kind of blind society that's not aiming for the good, that will end up in some very good place, where even if future society is kind of very rich, very wealthy, people are able to engage in trades, if people just want the wrong things, such as, wanting cheap meat and not caring about animal suffering, or in the future wanting cheap digital labor and not caring about AI well-being, well, then we again might lose almost all value. Okay, put this all together. What does this mean? Here I'm going to go all woo and spiritual. We need agents that have the kind of most desirable normative and non-normative views, as they have the right conception of the good, and they also have broadly the correct empirical worldview. And I'm actually just trying to produce it. So the thought is like, you've got this narrow target, which is a utopian world. You need some people who are actually aiming at it, actually trying to push society towards that world. I call these people bodhisattvas. To be clear, I'm not claiming that this is like, oh, it's me and you should just follow what I do, nor is it me and my friends, nor is it effective altruists. It might well even be that like, no humans are bodhisattvas in this sense. Actually, humanity as a whole is just kind of on the wrong track, morally speaking. I think we should be very open to that possibility. I also argue that I think it's kind of unlikely that most beings will be bodhisattvas in this way. And so it's maybe at best going to be a minority of such people. Okay, what does that mean if we want to get to Viatopia? Well, I think it means, one other point is, that's kind of pessimistic so far, which is like this narrow target. You need some people to really be aiming towards the target, but probably there's not that many. However, the optimistic thing is that potentially in a post-superintelligence world, gains from trades from different parties may be very, very large indeed. Much larger than kind of we see today. I think we have grounds for particular optimism if you don't need kind of all the resources that would be under humanity's or future civilization's control to be like dedicated to whatever's best. If it's just a bit, you just need to create a good society on some scale, that's like very optimistic. If instead value is just more like linear with resources being devoted to the good, I nonetheless still think that you can get quite large gains from scale, gains from trade. So that's the kind of overall thought. This does mean that we have this enormous number of challenges that you need to get through, including in order to reach a kind of near best society, including ones that are kind of often neglected. So there's kind of catastrophe and extinction, very familiar to people who focus on existential risk. Evolutionary futures, which are kind of at least bedfellows with kind of gradual disempowerment, though I think the concepts are slightly different. But the idea there is just, well, maybe the future is just controlled and determined by no one. There's, there's no one pushing in any direction, and instead it's evolutionary forces that are driving the future. Even if the course of the future is the result of kind of deliberate action from people, we still might get intense concentration of power. And if it's true that people aiming towards the good are just a small fraction of all possible beings, then concentrate power in the hands of a small number, probably they won't have aims towards whatever's best. Or there could just be like widespread misunderstanding of ethics, widespread misunderstanding of philosophy, or even of matters of fact. Or there could just be failures to aggregate preferences in the appropriate way. So perhaps there are some people who are really trying to aim towards the good, but they're in the minority, and the majority excludes them because of the kind of voting system that has been set up. Okay, this is a whistle-stop tour. I'll very briefly make the case for space. So when thinking about Viatopia, there's like lots of things you might want to think about. But I think that one of, and maybe even the most important decision of all, is how we will choose to govern deep space resources, in particular resources outside even the solar system. And why is that? A big thing is just that that's where basically everything is. In the long term, society will spread out across the stars, and our star is just one out of about 10 in the 22, which is a very small amount indeed. It's also quite plausible to me that decisions on even such a large scale all basically get made at once, because it's kind of just the same decision over and over again. Space is really quite uniform. And it'll be quite foreseeable that once you can start spreading into space a bit, you can spread very, very far. It's also quite plausible to me that many of these decisions really are quite path-dependent. Decisions made even in the kind of near term will actually just still hold indefinitely in a way that's kind of, we're really not familiar with from social decisions just now. I also just think this topic is absurdly neglected, where there's close to zero proposals on really how should we be governing kind of deep space. There is this whole field of space governance and space law, but it's really kind of just focused on this shell around Earth. Really, a really like, kind of tiny distance compared to thinking about the vast kind of scales that I think a post-AGI world will in fact unlock. So I've been thinking about this a bit. I have I have proposals. Lots of people should have proposals. But mainly I just think we should try and punt on this question. And this is actually one of the biggest things we could do in Viatopia. We should just accept that, look, if we try and have any sort of implement any sort of governance regime at the moment, we'll probably get it just really quite badly wrong. In the same way that, if we were trying to have a governance regime and we were kind of in the medieval era, we wouldn't have thought about like fancy voting mechanisms and gains from trade and things like that. And so I have kind of two views and kind of, space governance within the solar system. I think the way that you can give humans a kind of guaranteed income post-AGI, as long as they don't choose to give their resources away, is just to distribute land equally. So Anton Koronek gave this great talk earlier, where economic output is a function of the factors of production, that's labor, capital, and then also land, but where economists include kind of resources, like natural resources or energy within land. As labor gets abundant, as capital also becomes abundant, income share of the economy goes to like that which is the bottleneck, and that is energy, that is land. Now it's a convenient fact that there is a lot of land that is currently unclaimed. So ocean surface area of the high seas, various minerals and resources, and then also space. And where in a post-AGI world that's growing very rapidly, solar output from the sun becomes very valuable indeed. And so I think, we can really take care of people today and future generations by giving them a fraction of that. But then beyond that, I think we should just say, look, we really don't know what we're doing, and just say, like, look, let's just pause on any sorts of extrasolar emissions until some point in the future, I say 2100. And then at that point, put it up to some sort of vote on the governance regime via some fancy voting system, which we don't need to get into. And so I know this is maybe not something that people are thinking about too much today, but my take is it's extremely important and very neglected.